Hello, everyone, and welcome to my review of the Throne of the Tides mini set that is coming out, when this goes up on YouTube today. So we got a bunch of new cards. Always a great time to be a Hearthstone player when there's cool new stuff to enjoy. And the theme of the set, Throne of the Tides, these two, I turned the wrong way. These two colossal, monstrous creatures, Neptulon and Azumat, going at it deep under the sea. I figured that it's only appropriate, given that we are doing a review of the Throne of the Tides set with this deep undersea theme, that I'm gonna go full Jason Momoa Aquaman with the hair for the set review. You know, we gotta not even have it like pulled back or anything. It's got to be like flowing as if it is in the water. You know. There we go. Now I'm ready to cameo in Peacemaker. Anyway, so let's get to it. Throne of the Tides, the new mini set. Only a few cards for each of the classes, but there's definitely some cool stuff in here. So let's take a look. First up, we have Topple the Idol. This is Demon Hunter, by the way, in case you didn't notice. 5-cost spell, Dredge, reveal it, and deal damage equal to its cost to all minions. So this is the sort of card that could be very powerful / valuable in like a big Demon Hunter deck. The buff to Zillag alongside Keria does give like the big Demon Hunter style deck, I think, some interesting tools. And obviously, Dredge is a mechanic that is fundamentally valuable for any kind of combo deck because it's giving you more access to your deck than you would normally have just by naturally sort of drawing cards. So has some utility there in addition to being a potentially just very strong board clear for like a big demon hunter style deck. That said, I don't know that Demon Hunter, like big Demon Hunter in particular, really has the tools to navigate the current metagame where we have stuff like Holy Paladin and Charge Warrior that are burst killing people that you don't really have that have very good control tools as well as these burst kills, and you'd really need to have more disruption than I feel like a slower controlling Demon Hunter style deck really happens to have in order to be able to deal with that. So I think this is an interesting card. It potentially is a valuable card, but I don't know that this style of deck is likely to find a home in the metagame right now. But if it does, I do think this is potentially a strong tool for it. Next up, we have Herald of Chaos, a 3-cost 3/4 with lifesteal. Battlecry, if you've cast a Fel spell while holding this, gain Rush. I do feel like the Fel Demon Hunter is the style of deck that might have some legs in this expansion. We've seen some amount of it sort of resurfacing after the nerf to Drekthar and Multistrike, which put a damper on the more sort of aggressive build. I feel like having the sort of Fel package with Jace and all the various Fel control tools and damage tools alongside this for just a very, very powerful board control tool. Also, works very well. Obviously, like Predation and this as a Naga, very good sort of synergistic package to be able to really pick apart an opponent's board. Could give you some time against aggressive strategies like the sort of Thief Pirate Rogues, which are another of the very popular decks in the metagame right now, to sort of build toward those later game turns. Again, I do feel like a sort of burst focused control combo style deck in a world of the warrior, the Charge Warrior, and the Holy Paladin can tend to struggle because its vulnerability to armor gain and Cariel. But I think that this is a powerful tool for that deck regardless. And lastly, we have Fossil Fanatic, a 2-cost 2/2 after your hero attacks, draw a Fel spell, another tool for the sort of Fel arsenal. I do feel like if the Fel deck is to be successful, sort of based on what I was talking about before, you do want to be more of like a kind of mid-rangey deck, potentially playing the Jace as just kind of like a finisher rather than the focus of your deck, and be more of like a sort of mid-range aggro Naga type deck that has that kind of as the sort of capper of your curve. This is, I think a pretty solid tool in that deck. Be able to churn through your deck, find your fell spells. Obviously helps enable the previous card we just looked at, as well as just fueling up to get you to the point where you can potentially just burst your opponent down with Jace and such. So I do feel like the kind of potentially Naga Fell style of Demon Hunter has the most chance for Demon Hunter out of this particular mini set. Not really expansion, I guess. And does gain a couple of pretty big upgrades with the Fossil Fanatic and the Herald. Next up, we have Druid. Right now, most of the Druid decks you tend to see on ladder are ramp and frequently Celestial Alignment style Druid decks. The Druid cards in this set really don't fit into that strategy, so hopefully we can see some other Druid decks kind of take shape with this. Herald of Nature here is definitely a possibly powerful one. 3-cost 3/3 with Battlecry. If you cast a nature spell while holding this, give your other minions +1/+2. So obviously something that wants to go into a more aggressive, board-focused version of Druid. We've seen some experimentation with Beast style of Druid decks that have some pretty solid tools available to them. We could see potentially this going into like a Beast / Naga, or even just Naga Druid. If there's lots of nature spells that you can use, even this like Innervate, right? Using Innervate to power out your early minions, and then Herald of Nature to buff your early board can be quite powerful. So very, very solid card. It does need some sort of support in terms of spell school synergy, but again, there's a pretty wide range of decent nature spells that you can use to help facilitate building out your board and then also buffing it. Next up, we have Spirit of the Tides. 2-cost 2/2 elemental. If you have any unspent mana at the end of your turn, gain +1/+2. So this is a very interesting card. It is by default a spider tank, right? Like that you could play on 2, but if you play it on 3 and just don't spend the extra mana, you get a 3/4, right? But then can continue to grow. Does give some like level of utility to like having that Innervate we were just talking about for the Herald, to even like play this in turn 2, Innervate it. Hey, look, spider tank that could potentially grow. I feel like this is the sort of card that like is unlikely to be that good, because again, sort of the base rate you're getting for this is a 3-cost 3/4. Tons of things that are better than 3-cost 3/4s, with abilities that do exist. And then obviously like this can continue to grow if it doesn't get killed right away, which is, is valuable, but it feels like it takes a while before it really does much that's better than, a lot of other cards you can get that have additional abilities. So I'm not really impressed by this unless there ends up being reasons that you specifically want elementals in Druid, because it feels like there's just better options once you're actually effectively spending 3 mana for a card like this. Next up, we have Moonbeam. 1-cost arcane spell, deal 1 damage to an enemy twice. So this is kind of like the new Moonfire as far as like combo kill style cards in Druid for utilizing spell damage. It could be, 1 damage, or rather 1 mana for 2 damage, but it's mostly going to be like a Malygos style kill card where, you get a bunch of spell damage and you're like, hey, this, it's not 0, but it gets double effect from the spell damage for 1 mana. There isn't really much as far as like, spell damage Druid support. There is the Boomkin or whatever, which frankly, as I think about it right now, I literally don't even remember what it does, because there's that little support currently for like spell damage based Druid stuff. If you do have like 8 spell damage, 2 of these just kills your opponent, right? So, if you are playing like a draw your entire deck, build up a bunch of spell damage somehow in the form of old school Malygos Druid, this is definitely something to keep an eye on. It might not necessarily have a home right now, but this is definitely the sort of card that is worth remembering that it exists when you take a look at spell damage things in future sets. Because, as I mentioned, I don't really think there's quite enough to make this viable currently. But, who knows what the future might hold for sort of balanced Druid and blowing people up. Next up, we are into Hunter with Shell Shot. 3-cost nature spell, deal 3 damage to a random enemy minion, repeat this with 1 less damage. So I'm not sure how this interacts with the quest. I don't know if this triggers the quest twice, because it is repeat this. My guess is that it actually does trigger the quest twice because you're dealing damage twice because it's repeat this. Like it's not like Barb Nets only triggers it once, but because this is repeat this, I don't know if it counts as a second spell casting. So if it does, that's pretty crazy. If it literally ends up triggering the quest multiple times, that would be kind of gross. It can only target a minion, right? So if it is something that ends up being included in the quest text, it's at least something that you can theoretically like, not like allowing your opponent to trigger multiple times by not having multiple things in play. So that there is some amount of counterplay to it. The counterplay being don't play minions is kind of what we saw with Dragonbane Shot, which is sort of frustrating. Unclear exactly how this interacts with the quest currently, but if it does have the multiple triggers for the quest, this could end up being a powerful card that resurfaces that to prominence. Could also just be a card that, again, if we have a very minion heavy metagame, ends up being a powerful tool for hunters to be able to clear off boards of small minions, which normally they have some amount of difficulty with. But again, as I mentioned sort of throughout this video so far, right now the metagame does not really lend itself to be like a bunch of aggressive minions. It's much more sort of combo control style decks, and this is a really terrible card in those matchups. So I would be surprised if it sees any play outside of that potential interaction with the quest. Next up, we have Ancient Krakenbane. 3-cost, 3/3 Naga. If you've cast 3 spells while holding this, deal 5 damage. That's a lot of damage. 5 damage is quite a bit. I could potentially see this being a tool for like a aggressive Naga hunter. There's already the Naga's Pride, Lion's Pride, whatever it is, that makes 2/2 or 3/3 fish along with the Barbed Net, as well as stuff like tracking, etc. That gives you just a lot of ways in a spell-based hunter deck, to reload and also trigger something like this. So this card feels like it could be powerful. This is the sort of card that feels like it could help enable a new archetype of a more aggressive form of Hunter, which right now, Hunter, really, you only really see Hunter since the Dragonbane Shot and Drekthar nerfs, essentially as Big Beast Hunter, and having sort of an option to play a more aggressive Hunter strategy, as we have had since the dawn of time, may sort of revitalize interest in that class. And like I said, 5 damage is a lot. And this, I think, is not that difficult to enable with the tools that Hunter has available. Things like Ramming Mount and Doggy Biscuit and the various Naga, etc., etc., etc. So definitely, I think a pretty solid card that may create Naga aggro Hunter as an archetype. Speaking of aggressive Hunter decks, K9atron is a good boy. 2-cost, 2/3 Battlecry Dredge. If it's a 1-cost minion, summon it. We don't really have like classic face hunter seeing very much play in this expansion. This is a very, very powerful card for that style of deck, though. A 2-cost, 2/3 that comes with a 1-cost minion alongside it, that's pretty powerful, right? So you'd want to have a deck that has a lot of 1-drops, which a aggressive hunter deck typically will want to have. And this being able to potentially just like bring a body alongside it is pretty strong. I don't know how many great 1-drops there are. We don't have like the student anymore. I forget. I don't even remember the name of it. The Initiate that became a 3/2 when you played a spell. That went away with Scholomance. And now there aren't really that many great aggressive 1-drops, I feel like. So part of the reason I think that we don't really see much in the way of aggressive hunter as well. Obviously, the going into decks with a ton of armor gain and healing, as I mentioned before, with Holy Paladin and the Charge Control Warrior being among the most popular decks in the metagame, can make it pretty difficult to play that style of deck too. But maybe you can get enough aggression with the K9atron. Maybe this you end up having I guess it's really only the 1-drop Naga that's any good, so you can't really play this alongside the Naga stuff in that style deck. But I do like the fact that there are a number of tools that do actually promote playing aggressive styles of Hunter, since we really haven't seen any kind of aggressive Hunter this expansion so far. We've only really seen Quest and Big Beast, and we need our Sporks back. Next up, we have Mage. Mage finally gets a Polymorph again. Polymorph Jellyfish is a weird one. 3-cost, transform a minion into a 4/1 Jellyfish with spell damage +2. So Mage hasn't had Polymorph since the rotation, and now has this new version of Polymorph into a Jellyfish. We've seen like Polymorph Boar There's another polymorph something. I don't even remember what the other polymorph was. But this one, transform it into a jellyfish with spell damage +2. That does mean that you can ping it. So this can be a transform kill for 5. Can also be a way to, in a proactive deck, give yourself spell damage +2 as long as you do have a minion. You saw Polymorph Boar basically be a sometimes aggressive tool in like tempo style mage. You didn't really see it that often, and similarly I don't expect that we will see this particular card that often. It feels like it does like kind of two things not very well, of either removing a large opposing minion or giving you spell damage. It's not the best at either of those, and while flexibility does have value, mostly you're going to have a deck that wants like a thing. And I feel like you could probably do better than this kind of on either side. So unless there's like a particular deck that really wants spell damage, and also there's like, a deck that really wants to kill like Nelly before it gives your opponent the pirates, especially now that you can't tell what pirates are in the boat, so you're less likely to be able to like, judge effectively. Maybe that deck wants this, but otherwise I feel like this is more likely to be like a, card that sees play mostly when it's discovered. Next up we have Lady Nazjar. 5 cost 5/5. While in your hand, this transforms after you cast a fire, frost, or arcane spell. So basically, a card that is modal based on what you decide to play. But I don't know if this keeps changing, right? I'm not sure because it doesn't say retains this ability. So I think that the first spell you cast after she's in your hand kind of locks in the version she is, or at least it seems that way from the card text. But the versions are this one: Battlecry, deal 5 damage to adjacent minion and 5 damage to an enemy minion and 2 damage to adjacent minion. So that's the fire version. Allows you to AoE your opponent. Then there is the arcane version. Reduce the cost of spells in your hand by 1 as a battle cry. And then lastly, the frost version is gain 8 armor. Oh, I am getting a word from chat that it does keep changing, so it does not lock in. So you have the ability to kind of go back and forth with this. So this is a card that can be a lot of different things depending on what you're looking to do. The gain 8 armor version is actually, I think, probably the most powerful of them for a lot of decks, just because the survivability in Mage is going to be a really big deal for any kind of like slower controlling deck. Right now, the only real way to get survivability in Mage is largely through the Deepwater Evoker or Ice Barrier. And 8 is a lot of armor. Probably not quite enough to keep yourself alive against the kind of unbounded or barely bounded OTKs that do exist, again, out of the Charged Warrior and Holy Paladin, but can buy you some time against aggressive decks. The fire version similarly great against aggressive decks, and the arcane version, if you are playing a combo style deck, can be very, very good. So I feel like this is a card that none of these things are necessarily, kind of like Polymorph Boar. None of these are like the best thing available, but like they are somewhat unique effects. You're not really seeing like reduce all your spells in your hand by 1. If you're playing like a very spell heavy deck with the arcane version, that can be quite powerful. Can potentially set up like combos that we don't necessarily have the cards for right now, but might exist in the future. But the most sort of generically valuable feels like the frost version, and the gain 8 armor, keeping you alive against aggressive decks. Again, Mage kind of struggle with that, and that is a tool that you get to play outside of just a big spell deck, as long as you do have a bit of frost spells. So pretty cool card. And I do expect this one will definitely see some play, if nothing then because it can just fit into a bunch of different shells. And lastly for Mage, we have Submerged Space Rock, which is interesting. I think I saw like Regis Kilbin mention, what's with this being a space elemental? Are we going to space in the next set or something? Which is a little weird, but 2 cost 2/2 with Death Rattle, add 2 arcane mage spells to your hand. At the end of your turn, discard them. It's an interesting effect because, like, getting two spells for Death Rattle on a 2 cost 2/2 is pretty powerful. But you only have the window of a single turn to play them. Arcane spells, there's a number of arcane spells with card draw. Obviously, there's Arcane Intellect. There's Removal. But the fact that it is just like a 2-cost 2/2 that effectively generates significant value if you can use it right away, is an interesting kind of design space here. It's hard to really judge how good this is. I don't really see this as going into like any existing mage deck, because if you do care about having much spells, well, you usually want to build them up to something rather than just kind of play them right away. You could use something like Finley to put them on your bottom of your deck and then keep them for later, but that's kind of a ambitious and unnecessary plan for just a couple of random arcane spells. But overall, I think it's pretty sweet, and I don't know that it'll really see play until we see some specific incentive for either wanting Death Rattle cards or specific or a bunch of arcane spells or elementals in Mage, which don't really exist right now. Next up, we have Paladin. This is probably the card that I'm the most excited about in the entire set. Frontlines. 9-cost Paladin spell. Summon a minion from each player's deck. Repeat until either side of the battlefield is full. This card is so weird, right? It's super, super bizarre because, like, your opponent will get the first attack with a full board, right? And that is kind of brutal, Like, it feels like that's, like, pretty bad. But you built your deck with this in mind, so playing, like, big Paladin that gets a bunch of, like, rush minions or a bunch of, like, things that give you life, or bunch of, like, you gotta have a lot of big things in your deck in order to make this work, right? A lot of big things, and you can't have little things, right? You can't have like Doomsayer in your deck with Frontlines, because you Frontlines your Doomsayers in play. Your opponent like attacks you with everything, and then all your big stuff dies. But this is definitely one of the cards that I will certainly be experimenting with, because it just does seem like so cool. It is interesting the way that this interacts with Colossals, right? If you have a Colossal that fills up the board, right? Like say you have Azumat, right? One of the Colossals in the mini set, it just fills the board, right? Azumat just immediately fills the board, so your opponent gets a thing and you get an Azumat, and there you go. So you don't necessarily just get each player getting a full board of stuff because of that particular interaction. So that is pretty interesting. You can use this with like Phelan, right? You play Phelan, you Frontlines. Oh, look, I have all these Colossals. You can use it with like just a bunch of giant rush minions, right? You can use it with like Leviathan and the 8/8 who summons a 5/5 taunt when it attacks. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting ways to try and break the synergy of this, the symmetrical nature of it. With stuff like Colossals, with stuff like Rush Minions, with stuff like end of turn triggers, like a Baron Geddon to kill other small things. I don't know, but yeah, it's probably not good, but it's cool, and it's the sort of card that I definitely want to try to make work for that reason. Next up, we have Myrmidon. 3-cost 3/4 Naga. After you cast a spell on this minion, draw a card. There's a couple of things like this. There's like the guy who gets an extra +2 when you cast spells to them. And we lost Librams and we lost Hand of It All. We lost like a lot of the good spells to cast on minions right now. So I feel like we're in a place where like this is not great now, but has potential in the future. Like if we have like more cheap buffs for like a buff Paladin style deck. Right now, the sort of buffs that you mostly have in Paladin are like hand buffs, right? Whether they're like the mech hand buff stuff, or they're like whatever other forms of hand buff exist. Not really so much like spell based buffs. You really only have Noble Mount that tends to see like almost any play. You can use this with like Holy Maki Roll and draw a bunch of cards for 1 mana, which is sort of interesting. But it doesn't feel like it's worth putting this card into a control Paladin deck with Holy Maki Roll just for that possible synergy. But who knows? Because it literally is 1 mana draw card once this is in play if you're using Holy Maki Roll. So that is maybe worth, but not really the sort of gameplay that I would expect out of like a after you cast a spell and this feels like it points in the direction of buff Paladin. But maybe the Holy Maki Roll synergy is powerful enough that it ends up seeing play in that style of deck too. Unlikely in my mind, but maybe. Speaking of Holy Maki Roll, good friend of Light Ray. Light Ray is a 5/5 taunt. Costs 1 less for each Paladin card you've played this game. So this works best with cheap Paladin cards that create other Paladin cards. Things like Blessed Goods, things like Holy Maki Roll. But like the question is it worth it, right? Even if you're playing this for 0, how good is it? Because it costs 9 to start. You have to play a lot of Paladin cards to get this card down to a reasonable casting cost. You know, like you probably pay like 5 for this, right? At most. 5 cost 5 taunt is like still not a good deal, right? It doesn't have Divine Shield or anything, so it feels like a card that's like difficult to justify including in a deck because you know you have to do a lot to set it up. It's terrible in your opening hand, and then isn't that good. Like you're just getting a 5/5 taunt for it, right? Like this is very much like a Thing from Below, but Thing from Below like started at 6 and was triggered by something that you just now obviously playing Paladin cards something you want to do. But like the way that that fits into like what that deck wants to do, I think is different. Like, is this something that can fit into like a proactive Paladin deck? We're playing like like cheap taunts, even like 0 cost taunts in the sort of mid to late game is worth it. I don't know. I feel like the power level of this compared to Thing from Below, in comparison to like what the metagames look like, considering there's just a lot of AoE that can easily kill this in the form of like shield shatter and whatnot, and B, the sort of role of that sort of card in that kind of deck. Thing from Below is obviously very powerful in a deck with like stuff like Flame Tongue Totem, whatnot, whereas this is just kind of like a dude, which feels like it's has less place. Though Paladin probably draws cards a bit better than Shaman does, so can afford to play more stuff to enable this and easier to actually get it out. I don't know, hard to say. But overall, I think this does not really jump out to me as something that's likely to see a ton of play. But anything that's like hey, potentially like cheap or free minion is worth keeping in mind as you sort of evaluate stuff you might want to put into a deck. Like specifically, again, the Holy Mockery Roll synergy with the previous card and this one. Maybe there's something there, but it does not jump out at me as something that's like hey, this is like an obvious winner. Next up, we have Priest, Disarming Elemental, 4-cost 4/4. Battlecry, dredge for your opponent, set its cost to 6. This is a very interesting card. Dredge for your opponent, set its cost to 6 can be very disruptive, both in terms of messing with your opponent's draw, so you know that they're not getting a good card the next turn, but can also set like a key card in their deck to a high cost. For instance, if you're playing against like Combo Warrior, right, and you Disarming Elemental like they're to the front, they basically have to play Sir Finley on that to the front in order to like reset its cost. Same thing with like any kind of aggressive deck. You like give them an expensive card, puts them in a weird spot, and it's like it's not a good stat line, right? It's 4-cost 4/4, but it's not terrible. And for instance, let's say you're playing like Quest Priest, right? It's a 4-drop, which is in rare a rare thing to find in Priest is a good 4-drop for Quest Priest, right? But yeah, it's a really interesting card. Being able, it's not like hard disruption. It's obviously not going to screw up your opponent's like top end, but being able to give your opponent like effectively guarantee them a bad draw is an interesting mechanic that again, if your opponent has no way to like reset the cost, and I'm not 100% sure that Finley on a to the front would reset it. I think it does, because it changes zones, and anything other than tradable cards, typically when they do change zones like that, lose any sort of discounts. Like I believe if you Finley discounted cards into your deck, they lose the discounts. So, but again, I'm not 100% sure how this will interact with some of those cards. But my understanding is that it's at least going to put your opponent into a really awkward spot where now they need to re-find their card that you caused a cost increase on, yeah, I think it's sweet, and I don't know how much play it will see, because who knows if like mid-range Control Priest is remotely reasonable. But like for instance, you use this on like an opponent's in like against like a Boar Priest, right? Because I was just thinking like, hey, like something like Boar Priest, you use this in your opponent's like Amulet. Now your Amulet costs 6. You use this in your opponent's like some key combo piece in their deck. Okay, well now you're screwed up, right? Now like you give your opponent like a 6-cost wig in like or whatever. It feels like it's a pretty solid card, and I want to try it at least. Speaking of pretty solid cards, Drown, another 4-drop for Priest, and it's a shadow spell. Put an enemy minion on the bottom of your deck. So, couple things. One, kills anything, right? Gets rid of anything doesn't trigger a death rattle because it's basically like the Entomb effect previously. It is specifically bottom of your deck, so it's not like a strict upgrade from Entomb, which was Shuffle in. But I think this is just better than Entomb, right? It's a shadow spell. So this is crucially a way to deal with basically like any minion for 4 mana as a card you could potentially play in a Benedictus deck, a Shadow Priest deck. They did also just buff the Shadow Priest weapon card that AoEs your opponent when you play stuff. Again, my biggest concern for like most of these kind of like mid-range control-ish styles of decks that I keep mentioning is that it is very difficult to beat the sort of combo control decks in the form of Charge Warrior and Holy Paladin, because they have very good control tools to deal with like any sort of proactive stuff that you can do, and then the fact that they have burst kill stuff means that it is difficult to play like kind of a grindy game against them, because you try and grind them out with resources, pings, whatever, and then they just kill you in one turn. But maybe this is a card that goes into like, again, like a Quest Priest style deck, right? And that is something that gives you a hey, I win card that you could have access to. And those, as I was mentioning, often can struggle for 4s. Having this, and the previous as possible options at 4 can be pretty powerful. So that's one of the things that I definitely want to try, especially with the change to Behemoth down to 7, giving the deck a playable 7 outside of Mutinous. Really, I think these inclusions make me pretty excited to try out Quest Priest with the new mini set. Lastly, for Priest, we have Herald of Light. 3 cost 3 for Naga. If you cast a holy spell while holding this, restore 6 health to all friendly characters. That's a powerful effect. For any kind of, like, again, mid-range / controlling Priest deck, just having access to 3 cost 3/4 that heals 6, and it's to all friendly characters. It's not just to you. So if you do have like minions on the board that can get some trades in, and then Herald of Light them, that is like a lot of health that you are restoring to them and to yourself. So I don't know if this is powerful enough to justify actually playing. And again, my concern is more with combo controlled style decks right now in standard than they are with aggressive decks. But if we do see a rise in aggressive decks, with the mini set and some of the cards that we've discussed in, say, Hunter, this is obviously a very powerful tool to keep yourself alive against those. 6 health attached to a 3 for our body is certainly pretty good if your opponent's trying to beat you down. Next up, we have Rogue, starting with Inkveil Ambusher, a 1/2 stealth minion, +3 attack, and immune while attacking. Good in, against other minion decks. We don't have Greyheart Sage or anything anymore now, right? So, like, there's not, like, a stealth synergy type thing. It is, obviously a powerful card against other minion decks because of the immune while attacking thing. Be able to take out, an opposing 4 health minion. Does seem like it would be insane in Arena. I do see someone saying they got preemptively banned. Definitely seems like it should be, because wow, would that be absolutely ridiculous in Arena. But this is a decent aggressive tool, decent like tempo-ish tool for Rogue. Rogue already is in a pretty solid spot right now with at least the sort of pirate thief style deck. Is one of the solid decks that does exist in the metagame right now. I don't really think there's a home for this there, because the spots are pretty tight, especially because you want to be playing the pirate stuff. But yeah, I think this is just like a fine card, which is not necessarily the sort of card that sees play, right? Maybe there's again like a tempo rogue style deck that isn't like more pirate focused. But it feels like that one does not really cut it to me. It does hit pretty hard if you just want to play like a very, very aggressive deck, though, and you're playing less top end. So, next up, we have a very interesting one. Shatter Shambler. A 1 cost 1/3. Your next Death Rattle minion costs 1 less, but immediately dies when played. I am open to trying to get Death Rattle Rogue to work. I've always loved like the Forsaken Lieutenant plus like Graveyard plus Burning Blade Acolyte and things like that. I don't know if you actually play this in like the Bomb Rogue deck, because that deck wants to set up a lot of stuff, but maybe. But I like this. I think this is pretty cool. You can maybe build some sort of like smoke screen rogue deck. That's a card that hasn't seen like a single bit of play. But yeah, very interesting stuff. Definitely, a card that I am likely to experiment with for, the reasons that I'm discussing, being able to get a lot of those cool death rattles triggered. Again, though, that kind of value-y deck is the exact sort of deck that can struggle against like the combo control decks. But death rattles themselves are typically pretty solid against controls type strategies because it's very difficult to actually kill your stuff. Not that Shatter Shambler it ends up being great in those instances, but being able to set up this with like graveyard plus death rattle triggers to make sure you're getting the graveyard effect can be very, very good. Next up, we have Jackpot, 2-cost spell. Add 2 random spells from other classes that cost 5 or more to your hand. This card seems pretty bad. There's a lot of really bad spells, especially really bad expensive spells. I feel like if you're looking for cards to go into like Thief Rogue style stuff, there's already enough good ways to like steal stuff that you don't need more stuff to steal even more expensive stuff. And you're gonna, if you wanted expensive stuff, you want minions, not spells. And again, there's just so many bad spells, right? Maybe you play this with like, because I was at one point trying a version of Thief Rogue that was playing the 4-cost Naga that let you play a spell for free. Maybe this is good in that it's not a discover effect; it's random though. So again, there's just like so many terrible spells that you can hit with this, and it already like I feel like the at least most popular and most successful like statistically versions of Thief Rogue don't play most of the big Thief's payoff stuff anyway. They're basically just playing Null again, which I really dislike. I would love for Maestra Null not to just be the best way to play Thief Rogue and not actually playing it in the Thief cards just because Null's insane. But this just it feels difficult for this to be very good, right? And like Thief Rogue's biggest problem is being slow, right? Is like having to spend stuff to get stuff that is random, and then you also have to pay for. And this is spending 2 mana to get 2 things that are guaranteed to be expensive, and that's pretty mediocre, I think. A card that is not mediocre, Command of Neptulon, 5-cost spell, nature spell, crucially for Primal Dungeoneer. Summon 2 5/4 elementals with Rush with Overload 1. This card's great. This card is super good. I was already playing Primal Dungeoneer with a bunch of cards that I didn't even really necessarily like in Shaman. And this is a really, really powerful nature spell. Again, very important, the interaction specifically with Primal Dungeoneer, giving you another quality nature spell to include in a deck that uses that as your card draw tool. This is maybe almost enough that it's worth trying the 7-cost Naga guy. There's the 7-cost Naga that plays a random nature, fire, and ice spell, and frost spell from your hand, a copy of them. With this and Glaciate and Don't Stand in the Fire, you could just like blow up your opponent's board and make an 8-drop and just still have those cards left in your hand. Granted, you're casting this off a 7-drop, but it's a lot. You're actually getting a lot from it. So yeah, I think that's quite good. Anyway, that's something that's, I think, finally worth experimenting with. That previously was just like, what does this card even do? And now it does something. And I think this is just like, again, very powerful card for Dungeoneer. Maybe this is like, have we hit enough Overload cards that we could even play the Shaman quest again? I hope not, because quests stink, but maybe. And it's important to keep in mind, everything that pops up for that. When you're thinking about Overload cards in Shaman as well. Next up, we have Tidelost Burrower. 4-cost 4/4 Battlecry Dredge. If it's a Murloc, summon a 2/2 copy of it. This card's very good. I was actually very surprised when the set came out and there was like all of this Shaman, or rather all of this Warlock Murloc support, and no Shaman Murloc support when Shaman have been a very prominent Murloc class in the past. But this card's very powerful. 4-cost 4/4 that almost always will come with a 2/2 attached, and sometimes a 2/2 with a relevant ability, like a War Leader or whatever. Very, very strong. I think this is effectively a 4-mana 6/6 in most cases, and it's a 4-mana 6/6 that can come with additional upside most of the time. So very, 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 very powerful card. and pairs very well with this fellow, the Clownfish, a 3-cost 3/2 battlecry. Your next 2 Murlocs cost 2 less. So this is really good. One of the biggest things in Murloc is that you need to be able to play enough stuff together in order to get like synergies, right? And having your next 2 Murlocs cost 2 less to be able to play like War Leader plus Seer in one turn, right? For 2 mana, in addition to something else, that's crazy powerful. So, this is a 3-mana card that buys you 4 mana effectively, and can allow you to set up those powerful synergistic turns. I don't know if there's enough tools for Murloc Shaman now. There is Gorlock Ravager, which is a very, very powerful card draw tool, of course. But one of the things that you can always struggle with is running out of gas, and having to reload for 5 is pretty expensive. But with Clownfish and the ability to generate these really, really powerful boards early, it feels like you could have a lot of ability to kind of run away with the game from a snowball perspective. I do think, again, going to keep coming back to this, the vulnerability of a Murloc deck to stuff like Shield Shatter or a Quality Pyromancer and such is very high, and those are tools available to the current most powerful and popular decks in the game. So we probably don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves for how good is this Murloc Shaman style deck likely to be. Next up we have Warlock. You get Herald of Shadows. This is a 4/2 Naga. Battlecry, if you cast a shadow spell while holding this, steal 2 health from a minion. This is interesting. It's, assuming you've played a shadow spell, it's a 4/4 that kills something, right? Or at least weaken something. I just don't know where this goes, right? Like, there's not that many 2 health minions that you're going to really kill with this. Like, right now, it doesn't feel like there's like a Naga Warlock deck going on. It feels like if you are playing like a control Warlock deck, that you have so many removal tools, this is just kind of like another thing. And yes, you can get a 3-cost 4/4, but how good is a 3-cost 4/4 in the sort of metagame right now? Like, if there were a lot of 3/2s, right, it's gotta be insane, right? If there are a bunch of 3/2s in the format where you're just like, okay, I'm going to Touch of Nether's your guy, and now I'm going to Herald of Shadows that guy, and now you're just way behind. It just doesn't feel like it's that sort of format, right? Where there's a lot of aggressive decks where this card is likely to be good. If we do end up in a metagame like that, I think this card is likely to be amazing, right? Maybe this can end up being in some sort of Zoo style deck that plays shadow spells, but most Zoo style decks tend to be extremely minion focused and have a very, very light number of spells. So it seems unlikely it'll end up there. Very, very good against stuff like Mech Paladin, where this can just eat a 4/2 Divine Shield, right? You don't have to worry about the Divine Shield. It can be extremely strong there. So again, I feel like this is the sort of card that's very metagame specific. I don't know that the current metagame that we are in right now really supports this, but if the metagame does shift to feature more minion-based decks, especially minion-based decks like Mech Paladin, this could be extremely good. Next up, we have Commander Ulfok. Very weird card. 5-cost 7/7. Battlecry, your opponent's cards cost health instead of mana next turn. This card feels like... It's really interesting, right? Because this is like a card that you're just like, hey, I'm going to finish the game with this. If you're playing a very aggressive deck and you beat your opponent down to 2, you play this, and unless they have basically exactly Holy Maki Roll, they're dead, right? There's nothing they can do. Holy Maki Roll means that, hey, you're dead. They literally play everything forever. So probably in a world where Holy Paladin is one of the most popular decks, this is not really a card that you want to play. But, this is a sort of card where you can get ahead. You can get really far ahead. And a lot of decks won't be able to do anything, right? In an aggressive style of deck, I think this is actually a decent kind of capstone finisher, because you can stop your opponent from being able to play their mass removal or whatever. It is somewhat awkward that the mass removal in, say, Warrior, right? You have to have your opponent down to basically 0, because then they can start gaining armor and spending that to cast their spells. But yeah, it's kind of low-thebby, right? In the sense that the intent is to shut down your opponent on the turn that you're about to win. Is it worth playing a card like this? Right? Is it worth playing a card that you literally can't play if you're behind, because your opponent just gets to put you massively behind by spending a bunch of health for mana. You know, like it obviously, if your opponent's at like 4, right, it's going to be real hard for them to, like, you know, brawl your board away or flame strike your board away or play their hero card or whatever that could potentially save their life, right? I do think that, again, the popularity of Holy Paladin with Holy Maki roll makes this real dangerous in what would normally be a good matchup for it against a control deck. And similarly, like, the fact that Warrior can Shield Shatter for 0 if they, you know, have a little bit of life to work with to then, you know, Frozen Buckler to gain their armor, Shield Shatter for 0. Still doesn't kill the commander, at least. But, you know, the fact that they can play their removal spells without spending much mana at all feels like it's in a bad spot for this sort of effect right now. I do think it's cool, and I think that, like, a lot of people are memeing on it like it's a terrible card. I don't think it's a terrible card. I think it's a card that might be terribly positioned, but I think that this card, in the right context, can be very, very powerful and can close out games that you otherwise might not necessarily be able to win. Next up, we have probably the most controversial card in the set, Immolate. 4-cost fire spell. Light every card in the opponent's hand on fire. In 3 turns, any still in hand are destroyed. So this card is really interesting. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, this means that you can't ever play control. No, it doesn't. 3 turns is a lot of turns. And it starts at 4 mana, right? At 4 mana, your opponent spends 4 mana to do nothing. They literally have done nothing spending their 4 mana, right? They haven't impacted the board at all. And now you have 3 turns to play those cards, right? That means that, like, if your card, like, if they play this on exactly turn 4, you can still play things that cost up to 7, right? So I think this card is, like, at its best pretty clearly against combo. Very, very good against combo decks. And frankly, given that 2 of the most popular and powerful decks in the metagame right now are combo decks, that's probably a good thing to have cards that are good against combo decks. It's pretty good against control, but the thing is, like, it's not like game winning by itself. Like, like, if your opponent has like 9 cards in hand and you immolate them, they can still play a lot of those cards if they're cheap. And it's not like, if many of them are probably not going to do anything if they're playing a deck like very likely their own control style deck if they're going to be playing Immolate. This isn't a card you play in like aggro, right? This is a card you play in like a control deck to have game against combo and potentially an advantage against other control decks. So this can be like, maybe this is insane against like Ramp Druid, right? Like, you immolate them and they're like, oh god, oh god, oh god. Like, they can't just, like, you know, sit there with their million cards in hand to try and, like, you know, build up to doing their crazy powerful thing. It is, I believe, I assume, countered by Finley, because those cards aren't there anymore. So, like, if you are playing, like, a control deck and Immolate is popular in the metagame, there's already a built-in tool for you to play to try to beat it. So I think that this is, at its best, against combo, pretty clearly, and already has built-in possible counterplay in the form of Finley. So I like this card a lot. I think this card, the fact that this card exists, is good for the game, is good for the metagame, again, considering how combo-heavy the metagame currently is already, and frankly is probably not likely to be that good. I think this is the sort of card that people freak out about. They think it's going to be crazy, crazy powerful and warp and ruin everything, and then it actually gets into the metagame, doesn't really see play because, again, it doesn't really do anything in a lot of contexts and it gets weaker and weaker as the game goes on, except against decks that are specifically building to a very specific combo. So overall, you know, like I said, I think this is a cool card. Glad it exists. Glad there exists counterplay to it in the form of Finley already, and don't expect it to have that big of an impact on the metagame. Next up, we have Warrior. Warrior, again, already in a very powerful position with Charge Warrior as one of the best decks in the metagame currently. I don't feel like any of the cards that we're seeing right here necessarily go into it. Certainly not Tidal Revenant. 8 cost, 5/8. Battlecry, deal 5 damage, gain 8 armor. This card is probably not very good, you know? Warrior already has just so many good tools. Tons of good armor gain that already exists. This does have an immediate impact on the board, dealing 5 damage and gaining 8 armor. So it could see play. It's like fine, but I just wonder if like, you know, if you're going to play expensive stuff, there's just like already really, really powerful things that a lot of these decks have to play. And, you know, you don't really have much flexibility in like the builds of the current like combo style decks. They need a lot of the cards they're already playing. There's not really room for this. But maybe this is like a capper card, like a curve capper card on like a mid-range warrior deck. Those don't really exist right now though. It's kind of like a Moarg, right? Except it's a Moarg that it doesn't taunt, but it does kill something immediately. if you like somehow brought it back with like, some sort of reanimation type effect, you don't get the armor again because of the battle cry. I think it's like fine, but unlikely to see very much play. Next up, we have Clash of the Colossals. 3-cost spell, add a random colossal minion to both players' hand. Yours costs 2 less. Meh. There's a lot of great tools for Warrior right now already. Spending 3 mana to give your opponent a resource. Like you both get a resource. Yours does cost 2 less. So like you could potentially like ramp out a Colossal this way. This is actually the art in the background. Look. But yeah, overall, I think this is like unlikely to really see play. Just given again the sheer power of a lot of the tools that Warrior already has. There's already great ways to whether you're playing Charge Warrior or Kazakhstan style Warrior. There are a lot of very powerful win conditions that exist for Warrior right now. If you wanted to play like a tempo mid-range deck, this clearly doesn't really have much of a home in this because you're spending 3 mana to do nothing on the board right now. And most good decks can deal with an early Colossal right now, either because they are aggressive and they're killing you because you spent 3 mana doing nothing, or because they're a control deck that fundamentally just has a lot of tools to deal with that kind of thing. And our final Warrior card, Igneous Lava Gorger. 4-cost 3/5 elemental with Taunt. Battlecry Dredge, gain armor equal to its cost. So one thing I do want to note about the first Warrior card we talked about is that it was an elemental as well. This is an elemental. We might be seeing, with the number of elementals that have been in this set, some number of elementals coming and elemental synergy coming in the upcoming set, which obviously impacts a lot of these things in terms of how powerful they potentially are a great deal. This is, I think, just a solid card. A 4-cost 3/5 with Dredge, gain armor equal to its cost. Like, it's interesting because you can gain a ton of armor by putting something bigger on top of your deck, but if you put something bigger on top of your deck in these sort of early turns, well, now you have this big thing that you can't necessarily play immediately in your hand that you're drawing. Warrior also has like a lot of good things you can do with Dredge along. You could potentially just play your Into the Depths on turn 3, draw a cheap thing, then Igneous Lava Gorger, put the next thing on top, which obviously is reduced in cost, but now you can play on the following turn if you have like an 8 or whatever. So a lot of things that you can do to like, get a good chunk of armor while still playing a oversized thing, overcosted thing ahead of curve. There is a lot of pressure on the card pools of a lot of the Warrior decks that exist right now. Just given that, again, the 2 popular Warrior decks really are Charge Warrior and Kazakhstan Warrior. Kazakhstan Warrior really has like pressure on its card selection because of the necessity of playing enough dragons to trigger Kazakhstan, and then the Charge Warrior deck doesn't really have like much space because, well, it has a ton of combo pieces and card draw and removal. So I don't know that this really fits into anything that exists right now. But if there are like, again, like Elemental Warrior style deck or anything like that in future expansions, this card fundamentally I think is very strong and could definitely have a home in a place like that. Does give you armor like immediately, and potentially large amounts of armor for Shield Shatter or Shield Slam, which can be very strong in certain matchups. And potentially, maybe your goal is just like, hey, I'm playing Armor Warrior, and my goal is to out armor all these combos, even if they have these huge possible thresholds they can hit. I'm just gonna get as much armor as possible with every single armor gain thing, and end up beating you that way. We'll see. I might try it. Well, that is all of our class cards, which brings us to the neutrals. First up, in this corner, we have Neptulon the Tidehunter. So we got to do the full boxing intro because they're battling. And in Neptulon's corner, we have Neptulon's Hand. He just has a hand. That's it. Ta-da! So, Neptulon the Tidehunter, 10 cost 7/7 with Rush and Wind Fury. When Neptulon attacks, if you control any hands, they attack instead. First of all, really unfair to No Hands Gamer. Come on. Got to nerf him. He's too powerful. But it costs 10, which is obviously a lot. And it's just board control, essentially. Like this is kind of like a raid boss Onyxia, right? It's a raid boss Onyxia that kills like 2 big things rather than a bunch of small things. It doesn't feel like it's going to really be... This isn't the sort of thing that you're like, wow, my deck really needs this, right? It's an elemental, which is potentially relevant. Again, we were talking about possible upcoming elemental synergies. It is like really powerful against as like a finisher, right? Like this can actually kill the opponent faster than a raid boss. It's harder to kill like the every single bit of it, I think. Although the immunity, like with any kind of AoE damage, it just doesn't feel like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like this does much that Onyxia doesn't already do, because Onyxia can clear wider boards. This can kill like 2 big things, I guess, like does 8 and then 8, but Onyxia can do like 8 and then 12 split up. So I don't know. It feels like this is hard to justify unless you care about it being an elemental over Raid Boss Onyxia. If you're just looking at like, hey, I want a 10 cost rush removal thing, right? It does always get its trigger. So if you do just like somehow recruit this into play, it's not a battle cry, right? So you don't have like battle cry make things. You will always get the hands because it's colossal. So that matters in some instances. It's better to like reanimate than an Onyxia. It's better to like put it into play off of front lines or whatever than an Onyxia. I don't know. It feels like this feels to me like there's got to be some sort of elemental stuff coming to make this elemental stuff make sense, and especially to make having a card that is so similar in terms of functionality to Raid Boss Onyxia as kind of one of the capstone cards of the mini set, in order to justify its existence. It's a cool card. Like, I think that the hands, you throw them hands instead of this attacking is kind of cool because it's just like, immune, kills like multiple big things. But overall, again, feels very functionally similar to Onyxia, and I don't know that it's really necessarily like better anywhere outside of like against a deck with a bunch of like small AoE, because the 7/7 body can still just 14 them and kill them. Next up we have Bubbler, a 1-cost 2/4. After this takes exactly 1 damage, destroy it. So this card's pretty cool. 1-cost 2/4. Again, it's an elemental, so elementals obviously have more possible options if they do get some stuff in the next set. Taking 1 damage, killing it, it's kind of, it's not quite a 2/1, right? Because, well, if it takes 2 damage or 3 damage, it survives, which is really interesting. But it's still terrible against hero powers. It's awful against Rogue, against Druid, against Demon Hunter in particular, and against Mage, because it just dies to any of those things. But if you're trading 1 mana for 2 mana, even in those instances, again, the worst by far is against Demon Hunter, because they can just kill it for 1. You're still trading mana up. So yes, you're losing from a card perspective, but that can still be advantageous, and this could still potentially be, a reasonable option in some of those instances. It's very bad against like Paladin, the Paladin decks that play like Knight of Anointment, or especially like Righteous Protector, right? So maybe this ends up just being a weak card, but I think that in a lot of decks that are looking to pressure the opponent with like a lot of early minions, forcing your opponent into those positions where they need to take a mana negative trade by using the coin, or just like taking some damage and then hero powering it down or whatever, can put you in a position where like having an otherwise durable 1-drop. They need to take weird avenues to efficiently kill, can be pretty powerful. Next up we have Snapdragon, which has dragon in the name, but not in the minion type. It's a beast. 3-cost 3/3 Battlecry. Give all Battlecry minions in your deck +1/+1. This is kind of cool, at least. I like this in anything that has like Battlecry make a copy of this. This in like a Shaman deck with like Bolner and Bran. It's cool, right? It's kind of cool. I don't know that it's good, but like, it gives you like more of like a direction to be like, hey, I want to play like a Battle Cry, theme deck or something. But the fact that it only affects minions in your deck, it doesn't affect your hand, means that it is very slow. It's tough to really make this work, I think. It can work with Murlocs. A lot of Murlocs have Battle Cries, not all of them, but a lot of them do have Battle Cries. Handbuff Paladin plays a lot of Battle Cries, the Handbuff cards themselves, but again, the fact that it only affects your deck, it does affect like a lot of stuff because it affects your deck, right? Like you really want to play this early, but you really want to play like a very, not only minion dense, but Battlecry minion dense deck if you're playing this. I don't know, it's cool. It's definitely the sort of card that I'm like, how am I going to possibly use this? I don't know that it's actually possibly good, but it's interesting. And I may have to experiment with it just for that reason. Next up we have Coilfang Constrictor. 4-cost 5/4 Battlecry. Look at the top 3 cards, or rather, not top 3 cards. Look at 3 cards in your opponent's hand. I'm like so stuck on like Dredge, top and bottom. Look at 3 cards in your opponent's hand and choose 1. It can't be played the next turn. This card is really good, I think. Like, as this is kind of like that guy, right? The Warlock card we're talking about that was like, hey, you can't play your removal spell next turn. This is like that, but it's neutral. 4-cost 5/4, obviously stat-wise not amazing, But being able to like potentially stop your opponent from playing their mass removal spell right after you commit stuff to the board, really, really solid, right? You know, like obviously if your opponent has like a huge hand, this isn't necessarily going to hit their good stuff, but you can still very often, I think, put your opponent in a position where, you know, you can either finish them off or get like a huge chunk of damage in before they have the opportunity to play their removal. So I think this is great. I really, really like this card. It's like a disruption effect that isn't like a discard effect, but it can, you know, buy you like a window, you know, to either prevent your opponent from being able to deal with your board, most likely, probably the best use, or kill you, right? Like this could, you know, prevent your opponent from playing a combo piece to like win the game and then set up to let you win the game, whatever. Most likely, this is the sort of card that I think is going to be played in an aggressive deck that you kind of play it at the top of your curve, or at least not the top of your curve in the deck necessarily, but the top of your curve after you've played some stuff to put pressure on your opponent, and then stop them from being able to play their AoE. So I think this is a very cool card. I love to see it, and you know, I do expect this to see significant play. And our final bout in this corner. No, that one. I keep pointing the wrong way. I'm pointing the way that it is on my side and not on the screen. We have Ozumat. Ozumat weighing in at 8 cost with 6 tentacles. Ta-da, there they are. Okay, so a 8 cost, 6/5, Colossal 6. So this just fills your board right away. And Death Rattle, for each of Ozumat's tentacles, destroy a random enemy minion. So this is an interesting card because, A, you know, like if your opponent has a board full of stuff, your Ozumat, if they like kill your Ozumat, they have to kill all your opponent's all your tentacles before they actually kill anything. You can play this with like something that kills it yourself and kill all of their stuff, right? It'll kill 6 of their things. If you Ozumat into like Grimoire, kills all their stuff. I mostly think this card is not going to be good because it's like proactively, you know, when do you want to play this that it's like likely to actually have a meaningful impact? You know, if you like against any kind of aggressive deck, this feels too slow. Against any kind of like slower deck, well, they typically aren't like a major board-based deck, and then you still have to get Ozumat killed. Maybe you use this with like Devouring Swarm and Hunter, and you like Ozumat, Devouring Swarm, you Ozumat into their big thing. Boom, their thing dies. You know, that thing dies. Your Ozumat dies. You get the Ozumat back. The rest of their board dies. Yeah, I don't know. This feels like a very difficult card to make work, because you're paying a ton for effectively what is likely to be a like combo-based removal. I don't know. Neither of the big neutral colossals in this set feel like they're particularly amazing to me. Both of them feel like they're just like, hey, this lets you deal with an opposing board, and that's about it. And doesn't feel like the thing that you can really plan for. So neither of them really impressed me, and I would say this bout is a draw. But yeah, that is all of the cards from the Throne of the Tides mini set. Overall, I would say that there's nothing that stands out to me as like a must-have, like Mutinous in the past or things like that. There are definitely some interesting things. The stuff that I'm probably the most excited about, the 5-cost Nature Spell from Shaman, is the major standout card to me, for at least in terms of the stuff that I'm interested in brewing with. I think there's some cool stuff as well in Rogue. So I think that Immolate, again, is an interesting card in the way that the metagame exists right now, but overall doesn't really feel nearly as impactful as someone that we had in the past. I'm still going to pick it up, obviously, because, well, I want every Hearthstone card that ever exists. But yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily going to have a huge impact on the metagame, but there's definitely, like I said, some cool things that I am looking forward to trying out. So thank you all very much for watching, and let me know what cards from the mini set you are most interested in seeing. And if you did have to pick a winner of the fight of Neptulon versus Ozmit, who would you pick? Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.